It doesn't end with a gunshot. It doesn't end with the hospital. It ends with a sentence. I swear. That's the moment everything in The Last of Us really settles into place. Not when Joel carries Ellie out of the operating room, not when he guns down the Fireflies, not even when he kills Marlene. It's when he looks Ellie in the eye, after everything, and chooses to lie. Because that lie isn't just a cover story. It's a decision, a deliberate one, and it tells you more about Joel than anything he did with a weapon in his hands. By the time they reach Jackson, the violence is over. The running, the killing, the survival, it's all behind them, at least for now. What's left is quiet, space to think, and that's where the weight of Joel's actions actually lands. Ellie doesn't ask him about the hospital immediately. She doesn't need to. You can tell she already feels that something isn't right. The way he speaks, the way he avoids detail. It's not convincing, it's controlled. Joel tells her that the Fireflies stopped looking for a cure, that there were others like her, that her immunity didn't matter. It's neat, too neat, a version of events designed to close the door on any more questions. And then, Ellie asks him to swear. That's what makes the moment different. Up until then, Joel has been shaping the story, steering it. But now he's being asked to commit to it completely. No room to adjust, no room to soften it later. This is the point where he either tells the truth or buries it for good. And he chooses to bury it.
What's important here is that Joel knows Ellie. He knows she's not stupid. He knows she's going to question it. So the lie isn't about fooling her completely. It's about giving her something she can choose to accept. Something that lets her move on, even if part of her doesn't believe it. That's what makes it complicated, because on the surface, it looks like he's protecting her, sparing her from the guilt of knowing that her life could have meant something bigger, that she could have been the cure. In a world like this, that kind of knowledge would crush most people. But there's another layer to it. Joel isn't just protecting Ellie from the truth, he's protecting himself from what that truth would do to their relationship. Because if Ellie knew what really happened, if she fully understood that Joel took that choice away from her, there's a real chance she wouldn't forgive him, that she wouldn't look at him the same way again. And Joel can't risk that, not after everything. So the lie becomes more than protection. It becomes preservation of their bond, of the version of reality where Joel didn't just choose Ellie over the world, but didn't have to answer for it either. That's why this moment matters so much. It reframes everything that came before it. All the violence, all the decisions, all the loss, it all leads here to a quiet conversation on a hillside where the most important choice Joel makes isn't about who lives or dies, but about what kind of truth he's willing to live with. And more importantly, what kind of truth he's willing to let Ellie live with too. Because from this point on, the question isn't just what Joel did, it's whether he had the right to decide what Ellie gets to know about it.
Before the violence, before the lies, before any of it, Joel was just a dad trying to get through the day. That's easy to forget when you look at who he becomes later. The hardened smuggler, the man who can torture someone without flinching, the guy who runs over a stranger in the street without a second thought. But none of that is where Joel starts. In fact, the person he is at the beginning almost feels like someone else entirely. He's tired, overworked, a bit worn down by life, but he's still present, still human. You see it in the way he talks to Sarah, in the small moments, half listening to her, joking with her, brushing things off the way a parent does when they've had a long day. There's nothing remarkable about him in the traditional sense, no grand ambition, no larger purpose, just routine, work, responsibility. And that's exactly the point. Joel isn't introduced as someone extraordinary. He's introduced as someone normal, someone grounded, which makes what comes next feel less like a dramatic transformation and more like something that could happen to anyone under the right pressure. What really defines him in these early moments is his relationship with Sarah. It's not just that he loves her, it's how that love shows up. He's protective without being overbearing. Distant at times, sure, but not disconnected. There's history there, shared experiences. You get the sense that everything in his life, however messy or incomplete, is anchored by her. Even the small details matter. The broken watch she replaces, the fact that he keeps it, the way she tries to take care of him, even though she's the child. It's a subtle reversal that tells you something important. Joel isn't perfect, but he's trying. And more importantly, he still has something to lose. That idea, having something to lose, is what separates this version of Joel from the one we meet later.
Because once the outbreak begins, that stability disappears almost instantly. The world collapses, but more crucially, Joel's sense of control collapses with it. He goes from someone managing a difficult life to someone trying to survive a situation he doesn't understand. And in those early hours, you can see the shift starting. He becomes more direct, more forceful. The hesitation fades. Decisions are made quickly, sometimes brutally, but even then, it's still grounded in protection. Everything he does in that moment is about getting Sarah to safety. There's no wider moral calculation, no thought about the bigger picture, just one goal: keep her alive. And that's important because it sets the pattern. Joel doesn't operate on abstract morality. He doesn't think in terms of saving the world or doing what's right for the greater good. Even here, at the very start, his decisions are personal, focused, immediate. The world could be ending, and it still comes down to one person: Sarah. That mindset doesn't disappear as the story goes on. It just evolves, hardens, becomes more extreme. But at its core, it's always the same. Which is why this chapter matters. Because if you skip over who Joel was before everything fell apart, then his later actions start to look like a complete transformation, like he became something else entirely. But that's not really what happened. The traits were already there. The instinct to protect, the willingness to act decisively when it mattered, the focus on the individual over the collective. The difference is that at this point, those traits exist in a world where they still make sense, where protecting someone you love doesn't come at the cost of everyone else. That changes very quickly. And when it does, Joel doesn't adapt by questioning those instincts. He doubles down on them. Because once the world takes everything from him, the only thing that's left is the part of him that refuses to lose someone again.
To understand Joel, you have to understand the world he's thrown into. This isn't just a collapse of society in the usual sense. It's not war or economic failure or political chaos. It's something far more insidious. A mutated strain of Cordyceps fungus, a real organism that infects insects, has adapted to humans. It spreads through bites, through blood, through spores, and once it takes hold, it doesn't just kill you, it rewires you, turns people into hosts, into violent, mindless carriers of the infection. Within days, entire cities fall apart, governments lose control, military forces turn on civilians just to contain it. There's no plan, no cure, just containment and survival. And Joel is right in the middle of it. The night everything changes doesn't feel like the end of the world at first. It's confusion. Sirens in the distance, news reports that don't quite make sense, people acting strangely. Then suddenly it escalates. Fast. His neighbor attacks them without warning, already lost to the infection. Joel doesn't hesitate. He shoots him. And that's the first real shift. Not the act itself, but how quickly he does it. There's no time to process, no time to question. From that moment on, everything becomes reaction. Tommy arrives. They get in the truck. Roads are packed, people trying to escape, but no one knows where to go. The infection is spreading faster than anyone can respond. Helicopters crash overhead. Fires break out. Cars are abandoned mid-road. It's not organized panic. It's total collapse. And even here, Joel is still operating on instinct. Get Sarah out. Keep moving. Don't stop. There's a moment when they pass a family, asking for help on the side of the road. Tommy hesitates. Joel doesn't. He tells them to keep driving. It's harsh, maybe even cold, but it's logical in that moment. They don't know what's happening. Stopping could mean getting trapped, infected, killed. Already you can see it, the beginning of a mindset that prioritizes survival over everything else.
Eventually, the truck crashes. They're forced to run on foot. Joel carries Sarah because her leg is injured, and that image is important. He's not fighting, not thinking about anything else. He's just trying to keep her alive. The chaos around them barely registers anymore. Then they reach the soldier. For a brief second, it looks like safety, authority, structure, the kind of thing that's supposed to protect people when everything else falls apart. The soldier checks with his superiors. You can hear it over the radio. Confusion, uncertainty. And then the order comes through. Execute them. That's the moment the world doesn't just collapse. It turns on Joel completely. The soldier opens fire. Joel tries to shield Sarah, tries to get out of the way, but it's too late. Tommy shoots the soldier, but the damage is already done. Sarah's been hit. And this is where everything stops. All the chaos, all the noise, all the panic. It fades into the background. Joel isn't thinking about the infection anymore. He's not thinking about escape. He's not thinking about survival. He's just holding her. There's something brutally simple about that scene. No dramatic speech, no big moment of acceptance. Just denial, confusion, the refusal to believe what's happening. He keeps talking to her, like she's going to respond, like this is something that can be fixed. But it can't. And when she dies, it doesn't just take her life. It takes the version of Joel we saw in the previous chapter with her. Because from that point on, everything he becomes is shaped by that moment. It's not just grief, it's the way it happens. The fact that it wasn't the infection that killed her, but a human decision, an order, a system choosing containment over compassion. That matters. Because it teaches Joel something early on, that the world won't save you. That even the people who are supposed to protect you can turn on you without hesitation. And more importantly, it teaches him that hesitation gets people killed. That lesson sticks. It's why he doesn't stop for strangers later. Why he recognizes ambushes so quickly. Why he doesn't trust authority or systems or bigger causes. Because the last time he trusted any of that, it ended with him holding his daughter as she died in his arms. So when people ask why Joel becomes the way he does, this is it. Not just the loss, but the way it happened. Because from that point on, Joel isn't trying to save the world anymore. He's trying to make sure he never feels that again.
The game skips 20 years. And in most stories, that kind of jump is used to move things forward quickly, to get from one major event to the next. But in The Last of Us, that gap matters more than almost anything we actually see, because it's where Joel becomes the person we're trying to understand. When we meet him again in Boston, the world has settled into something grim but stable. Quarantine zones, military control, ration cards, black markets. The Cordyceps infection hasn't gone away, it's just been contained in pockets, pushed to the edges, allowed to fester outside the walls. Inside, people survive, not live. Survive. And Joe fits into that world a little too well. We don't get a montage of what those 20 years looked like, but the game doesn't need to show it. Joel tells us enough himself, and what he doesn't say is just as important as what he does. There's a line he drops later, almost casually, when Ellie asks how he knew the ambush in Pittsburgh was a setup. "I've been on both sides." He doesn't elaborate. He doesn't need to. That one sentence tells you that Joel didn't just defend himself during those years. He preyed on other people. He was one of the hunters, the kind of person who would fake an injury, lure someone in, and kill them the second they let their guard down. The kind of person he later recognizes instantly because he used to think exactly like them. And that changes the way you see him. Because it means Joel didn't just lose his morality when the world fell apart, he adapted it. He reshaped it into something that worked in this new environment. In a world where resources are scarce and trust gets you killed, being ruthless isn't just useful, it's effective. There's also the question of Tommy, and this is where things get even more revealing. Joel and Tommy didn't just drift apart. They split because Joel's way of surviving became too much. Tommy couldn't live like that anymore. Whatever they did during those years, whatever Joel was willing to do, it left a mark deep enough that Tommy walked away from his own brother to join the Fireflies, a group built around the idea that something better could still exist.
That tells you everything. Joel didn't believe in that anymore. Not in rebuilding, not in causes, not in hope. Tommy did. And that difference wasn't small. It was enough to tear them apart completely. So by the time we see Joel in Boston, we're not looking at a man who's still processing loss. We're looking at someone who's already made peace with a much darker version of the world. Someone who has learned over and over again that survival comes first and everything else comes second. You see it in the way he carries himself, the way he talks, the way he approaches every situation like it could turn violent at any moment. There's no hesitation in him anymore, no visible doubt. Even his interactions are transactional. People are useful, or they're not. That's about as far as it goes. And yet, underneath all of that, there's something else still there. Not softness, exactly, not the version of Joel we saw with Sarah, but something quieter, controlled. He doesn't talk about the past, but he hasn't erased it either. He still wears the watch she gave him, even though it's broken. He hasn't fixed it, hasn't replaced it. He just carries it, like a reminder of something he doesn't allow himself to fully confront. That's the tension that defines this version of Joel. On the surface, he's exactly what this world demands: efficient, brutal when necessary, completely focused on survival. But the reason he's like that isn't because he enjoys it or because it comes naturally to him. It's because he learned, the hard way, that anything less gets people killed, including the people you love. So when we talk about Joel as a hunter, it's not just about the violence. It's about what that violence represents, a set of choices repeated over years that slowly strip away anything that doesn't serve survival. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until what's left is someone who can do what needs to be done without stopping to question it. And the most important part is this: by the time the story really begins, Joel isn't trying to become a better person. He's already decided that this is what he has to be.
If Chapter 4 shows you what Joel became, then this chapter shows you what it cost him. Because Joe didn't go through those 20 years alone. He had Tommy, his younger brother, the one person who knew him before everything fell apart, the one person who survived that first night with him. They started that journey together, and for a time they stayed that way, moving from place to place, doing whatever they had to do to survive in a world shaped by the Cordyceps outbreak. But somewhere along the line, they stopped being the same people. The game never gives you a full breakdown of what happened between them, but it doesn't need to. The fragments we get are enough to piece it together, and when you do, it becomes clear that Tommy didn't just leave because of circumstance. He left because of Joel. Tommy says it outright at one point. He talks about the things they did, the way they survived, and he admits that it gave him nightmares. That line matters because it tells you something Joel never says himself. Whatever they were doing out there wasn't just harsh, it was extreme. Not just killing to defend themselves, but killing as a way of life, ambushing people, taking from them, becoming the kind of threat others had to fear. Joel adapted to that world. Tommy couldn't. And that difference creates a kind of pressure that builds over time. Joel sees survival as the only priority. Do what you have to do, don't hesitate, don't question it. Tommy still believes there has to be something more than that. Some kind of purpose. Some kind of line you don't cross, even when everything else is falling apart. Eventually, that gap becomes too wide. Tommy joins the Fireflies, a group that, despite all its flaws, represents the opposite of Joel's worldview. They believe in rebuilding, in finding a cure, in fighting for something beyond immediate survival. To Joel, that probably looks naive at best, dangerous at worst. But to Tommy, it's necessary. It's a way out of the cycle they've been stuck in. And when Tommy leaves, it's not just a disagreement, it's a rejection. He's not just walking away from Joel physically, he's walking away from the life Joel represents, from the choices he's making, from the idea that this is all there is now.
For Joel, that kind of loss hits differently than Sarah's death, but it still matters. Because this time, it isn't something the world takes from him, it's something that chooses to leave. And if you look at Joel's character closely, that's a pattern that stays with him. Sarah is taken from him suddenly, violently, with no control. Tommy leaves him because of who he's become. Both situations reinforce the same underlying idea, that connection leads to pain, and that one way or another, people don't stay. So Joel adjusts again. He doesn't chase Tommy. He doesn't try to fix things. He lets him go. And that decision tells you a lot about where Joel is mentally at that point. Because earlier in his life, that might not have been the outcome. Earlier, he might have argued, tried to hold on to that relationship, push back against the idea of losing his brother. But this version of Joel doesn't do that. He accepts it. Not because it doesn't matter, but because he's already started to believe that this is how things work now. People come and go. People die, people leave, and trying to hold on to them only makes it worse when they're gone. So instead of resisting it, he leans into it. He becomes more isolated, more self-contained, more focused on what he can control, which, at this point, is very little beyond his own actions. Relationships become liabilities, attachments become risks, and slowly, without ever saying it out loud, Joel starts to build a version of himself that doesn't rely on anyone else. That's the version we meet in Boston. And it's important to understand that it didn't come out of nowhere. It was shaped, piece by piece, by moments like this, by loss that wasn't just forced on him, but chosen, by people deciding they couldn't follow him down the path he was on. So when Ellie comes into his life later and we see how resistant he is to forming any kind of bond with her, it's not just about Sarah. It's about Tommy, too. It's about the lesson Joel has learned over and over again, that getting close to someone doesn't just put them at risk, it puts you at risk as well. And after everything he's already lost, that's a risk he's no longer willing to take.
By the time we properly step into Joel's world again, he isn't wandering alone through the aftermath of the Cordyceps outbreak. He's settled into a system, not a good one. Not a moral one, but a functional one. The Boston quarantine zone is tightly controlled by the military, rationed, monitored, and constantly on edge. And within that structure, Joel operates in the shadows, smuggling, trading, dealing with people most would rather avoid. It's not chaos anymore. It's organized survival. And Tess is a big part of that. Their relationship is never fully spelled out, but you don't need the game to explain it directly. There's history there. Trust, built over time. Maybe something more at one point. Maybe not. But what matters is that Tess understands Joel, and more importantly, she operates on the same level. She isn't a moral counterweight to him. She doesn't question the kind of work they do.
If anything, she reinforces it. Together they form a kind of equilibrium, two people who have accepted the world for what it is and adjusted accordingly. That becomes very clear when Robert enters the picture. Robert isn't some major villain. He's small-time, opportunistic, the kind of person you'd expect to find thriving in a place like this. He double-crosses Joel and Tess, steals their weapons, and tries to sell them off to someone else. In another kind of story, this would be handled with negotiation, maybe even restraint. But that's not how things work here. Joel and Tess don't go looking for answers. They go looking for him. What follows isn't dramatic or chaotic. It's controlled, direct. Joel tracks Robert down, corners him, and immediately turns to violence not as a last resort, but as the first option. He beats him, restrains him, and starts asking questions, but even then is not really about getting information. It's about asserting control over the situation. Robert isn't someone Joel sees as worth reasoning with. He's a problem to be solved, and once he's served his purpose, Tess shoots him. Just like that. No hesitation. No discussion about what to do next. No moment of reflection. Robert is useful while he has information, and once that's gone, so is he. The speed of it is what makes it stand out. It isn't framed as shocking, because for Joel and Tess, it isn't. This is normal. This is how things are handled. That's the key point here. Violence isn't something Joel escalates to. It's something he defaults to. And it's not driven by anger or emotion or even revenge. There's no sense that Joel enjoys what he's doing, but there's also no sign that it weighs on him either. It's practical, efficient, necessary. The same way someone might approach fixing a problem at work or dealing with a broken piece of equipment. That detachment is what defines this version of Joel more than anything else.
Joel would have reacted differently, or at least felt something in the aftermath. But here, there's nothing. No visible guilt, no second guessing. The situation is resolved, and he moves on to the next step. Even the way he interacts with Tess reinforces this. There's no debate between them about whether Robert deserved it, no moral discussion. They're aligned completely, not just in action, but in mindset. That kind of alignment only happens when both people have gone through similar changes, when they've both accepted the same harsh logic about how the world works now. And yet, even within this, there are small hints that Joel hasn't completely flattened into something unrecognizable. He still listens to Tess. He still defers to her judgment in certain moments. There's a level of partnership there that suggests he hasn't entirely abandoned the idea of connection, just narrowed it down to a very specific, controlled form. One that doesn't demand vulnerability, and one that can function without emotional risk. Because that's the balance Joel has found. He hasn't become reckless. He hasn't lost control. If anything, he's more controlled than ever. Every decision is deliberate, every action calculated, but that control comes at a cost. And you can see it in moments like this. The way violence slips in so easily, the way people are reduced to problems, the way resolution is measured in efficiency rather than consequence. By this point, Joel isn't just surviving in this world. He understands it. And more importantly, he's learned how to operate within it without letting anything slow him down. Not doubt, not empathy, not the weight of what he's doing.
When Ellie first enters Joel's life, she doesn't enter as a person. She enters as a job. And that distinction matters more than anything else in the early part of their relationship, because it tells you exactly where Joel is mentally at this stage. He isn't open to connection. He isn't looking for meaning. He isn't trying to rebuild anything resembling a normal human bond. He's operating within the system he's built over 20 years, one where everything is transactional, controlled, and most importantly, temporary. Ellie is just another transaction. That becomes obvious the moment Marlene presents the deal. Transport the girl, get the weapons back, maybe even more. Joel doesn't ask questions. In fact, he actively avoids them. When Ellie pushes him about why she matters, why the Fireflies are so invested in her, his response is blunt. He doesn't need to know. That's not curiosity. That's intentional distance. because knowing makes things complicated, and Joel doesn't do complicated anymore. What's interesting here is that this isn't indifference in the traditional sense. Joel isn't ignoring Ellie because he doesn't care about anything at all. He's ignoring her because he's learned that caring is dangerous. Every meaningful connection he's had has either been taken from him or has walked away. Sarah is gone. Tommy left. Even his life with Tess exists within very strict boundaries. Nothing too deep, nothing that can't be cut off if needed. So when Ellie shows up, young, talkative, unpredictable, she represents everything Joel has spent years avoiding. She asks questions, she pushes back. She doesn't follow the unspoken rules of this world the way Joel does. And that makes her a problem, not just physically, but psychologically. She forces interaction, forces attention, forces him to acknowledge her as more than just cargo, even when he's trying not to.
That's why Joel keeps pulling back. He doesn't look at her when they first meet. He doesn't engage in conversation unless he absolutely has to. Even the way he talks about the mission reinforces that distance. It's about getting her from point A to point B, and that's it. No attachment, no responsibility beyond the job. But the world they're moving through doesn't allow that kind of detachment to hold. The Cordyceps infection isn't just a background threat. It constantly forces Joel into situations where instinct takes over. When they're stopped by the military patrol and Ellie is scanned, everything shifts in an instant. The scanner shows she's infected. The soldier moves to execute her, just like the soldier did with Sarah all those years ago. And Joel reacts. Not slowly, not thoughtfully, instinctively. He kills the soldier. That moment is important because it breaks the illusion Joel is trying to maintain. Up until then, he's been treating Ellie as expendable, at least in theory. But when faced with the possibility of losing her in the same way he lost Sarah, his body moves before his mind can catch up. He doesn't weigh the consequences. He doesn't consider the mission. He just acts. That tells you something he hasn't admitted to himself yet. Ellie is already more than cargo. He just doesn't want to accept it. So instead of leaning into that realization, Joel does what he's done for the past 20 years. He suppresses it, doubles down on the detachment, becomes colder, more direct, more dismissive. He shuts down any attempt Ellie makes to connect, whether it's through conversation, humor, or simple curiosity. Because acknowledging that connection would mean accepting the risk that comes with it. And Joel knows exactly what that risk looks like. It looks like Sarah in his arms. It looks like Tommy walking away. It looks like every moment he allowed himself to care, only to lose it. So he builds a barrier, not out of cruelty, but out of survival. And that's what makes this stage of Joel's character so important. It's not just that he starts off distant. It's that the distance is deliberate. It's a defense mechanism refined over years, designed to prevent exactly the kind of attachment Ellie is slowly forcing into existence. But here's the thing. That defense is already starting to crack. Not in obvious ways, not in long conversations or emotional confessions, but in moments, quick, instinctive reactions where Joel reveals something he can't quite control. Saving Ellie without thinking, watching her more closely than he needs to, responding when he could ignore her. Those moments don't seem like much on their own, but they build. And they matter because they show that Joel's attempt to reduce Ellie to a job is already failing. He just hasn't caught up to it yet. And that gap between how Joel sees the situation and what he's actually doing is where his character really starts to shift. Because once that gap closes, once he fully accepts what Ellie means to him, everything that follows becomes inevitable, including the choice he makes at the very end.
Up until this point, Joel has been trying to keep everything contained. Keep the mission simple, keep Ellie at a distance, keep himself in control. But the world he's moving through doesn't respect those boundaries, and the moment they're stopped by the military patrol is where that carefully constructed control starts to slip in a way Joel can't fully ignore anymore. Because this isn't just another obstacle. It's a situation that mirrors something he's already lived through. They're caught in a checkpoint, lights in their faces, guns raised, no real room to talk their way out of it. The soldiers aren't asking questions out of curiosity. They're following procedure. Scan for infection, assess the threat, eliminate if necessary. It's efficient, cold. The same system that tried to restore order after the Cordyceps outbreak took hold. And for Joel, that system is already broken. The scanner hits Ellie, and for a second, everything slows down. There's confusion. She reacts first, panicking, attacking the soldier, which only escalates the situation. Now there's no ambiguity, no hesitation on the soldier's end. He's going to shoot her. And in that moment, Joel doesn't think. He doesn't weigh the risk. He doesn't consider the consequences of killing a soldier inside a quarantine zone. He doesn't even fully process what's happening. He just acts. He kills him. And it's the way he does it that matters. This isn't calculated like the situation with Robert. It isn't controlled or measured or even particularly clean. It's immediate, instinctive, almost reflexive. The kind of reaction you only get when something deeper is being triggered. Because Joel has been here before. A soldier, a command, a decision made in seconds that ends with someone dying who shouldn't have.
The difference this time is that Joel gets there first. That's the crack. For all the effort Joel has put into keeping Ellie at arm's length, in that moment, he reacts as if she already matters, as if losing her is something he refuses to allow, regardless of the situation, regardless of the cost. And the important thing is, he doesn't choose that reaction consciously. It happens without permission. Afterwards, there's no big moment where Joel acknowledges what he's done. In fact, he does the opposite. He tries to pull everything back under control. He focuses on escaping, on surviving the immediate fallout, on re-establishing that emotional distance he's been trying to maintain since the beginning. But something has already shifted. You can see it in how he looks at Ellie after they get out. Not in a dramatic way, but in small, subtle changes. He's more aware of her now, more reactive. The barrier he's built is still there, but it's no longer solid. It's been tested, and it didn't hold the way he expected it to. And Ellie herself complicates things further, because she doesn't behave the way Joel expects. She doesn't collapse under pressure. She doesn't act like someone who needs constant protection. She pushes back, questions him, challenges his decisions. When she reveals that her bite is weeks old, that she's somehow immune, it reframes everything. Now she's not just cargo, she's important. Not in an emotional sense, at least not yet, but in a way that makes the mission bigger than Joel initially thought. There's suddenly a reason behind all of this, something tied to the Fireflies, to the idea, however distant, of a cure for the Cordyceps infection. And that creates tension, because Joel doesn't believe in that kind of hope anymore. Not after everything he's seen. Not after 20 years of watching the world stabilize into something brutal and static. The idea that one person could change that feels unrealistic, maybe even dangerous. But at the same time, he's just risked everything to keep that person alive. That contradiction is what defines this chapter. Joel is still trying to operate on logic. This is a job, this is a deal, this is about getting from one place to another. But his actions are starting to drift away from that logic. They're becoming personal, even if he won't admit it yet. And once that shift begins, it's very hard to reverse. Because now every decision Joel makes involving Ellie is going to carry that underlying instinct with it. The same instinct that made him pull the trigger without hesitation. The same instinct that, years ago, wasn't fast enough to save Sarah. This time, it was. And that difference matters more than Joel realizes. Because it doesn't just change how he sees Ellie, it changes how he sees himself. Not as someone who's just surviving anymore, but as someone who, despite everything, still has something left to protect. And once that idea takes hold, even slightly, it starts pulling him in a direction he spent 20 years trying to avoid. A direction that leads straight back to attachment. And eventually, to a decision he won't be able to walk away from.
Before Bill, before the truck, before Joel even has time to think about what Ellie really is, Tess dies. And it doesn't happen slowly. It doesn't build. It just hits. They reach the Capitol building expecting to hand Ellie off to the Fireflies and be done with it. That was always the plan. Keep it simple, keep it clean, no attachment, no long-term responsibility. Joel never wanted this to turn into anything more than a job, and Tess, for the most part, was operating on the same wavelength. But when they get there, everything falls apart. The Fireflies are dead. The deal is gone. The entire reason for the journey disappears in seconds. And suddenly Joel is left with something he didn't plan for. Choice. Walk away or keep going. And he's already leaning toward walking away. That's important because it shows you where Joel still is mentally at this point. Even after everything, the soldier, Ellie's immunity, the cracks starting to show, he's still trying to retreat back into that old mindset. This isn't his problem. This isn't his responsibility. The deal is off, so he's done. Then Tess stops him. And what she reveals changes everything. She's infected. In a world defined by the Cordyceps fungus, that's not just a death sentence, it's a timer. It means she has hours, maybe less, before she becomes something else entirely. And for the first time in the story, Joel is confronted with a loss that isn't sudden, like Sarah's, or distant, like Tommy leaving. This one is immediate, right in front of him. She doesn't ask Joel to save her. She doesn't ask for comfort. What she does instead is force Joel to look at Ellie differently. She tells him Ellie matters, that her immunity isn't just rare, it's real, that this might actually mean something, even in a world where meaning has been stripped away. And Joel resists it. You can hear it in the way he responds. He tries to shut it down, tries to pull back to what he knows. This isn't them. This isn't their fight. They should just leave. It's the same instinct we've seen before. Avoid the attachment, avoid the risk, avoid the pain that comes with it. But Tess doesn't let him. Because for her, this is the one moment where something bigger than survival actually feels possible. And she knows Joel. She knows exactly what he's been doing for the past 20 years. Shutting down, surviving, avoiding anything that could hurt him again. So she forces him into it. Not gently, not indirectly. She makes it clear this is his responsibility now. And then she stays behind. Not because she has a chance, but because she doesn't. She buys them time, holding off the soldiers as Joel and Ellie escape. There's no dramatic farewell, no drawn-out goodbye. Just a decision, made quickly, the same way Joel makes his decisions. Only this time, it's not about survival. It's about purpose. That's the difference. Tess dies believing that Ellie matters, that this journey means something, and that Joel is the one who has to carry it forward. And whether Joel likes it or not, that belief gets handed to him in that moment. He doesn't accept it immediately. In fact, for a while he pushes against it. You can see it in how cold he becomes afterwards, how quickly he shuts down any mention of Tess. When Ellie brings her up, Joel snaps back, hard. Not because he doesn't care, but because he does, and he doesn't know what to do with that feeling anymore. That's always been his pattern. Loss happens, and instead of processing it, he buries it. But Tess is different, because unlike Sarah,
whose death pushed Joel deeper into survival mode, Tess's death does something more subtle. It redirects him. It gives him something he can't easily dismiss, a task, a purpose, a reason to keep going that isn't purely about himself. And more importantly, it ties that purpose directly to Ellie. So even if Joel continues to treat her like cargo on the surface, the foundation has already shifted. This isn't just a job anymore. Not really. Tess made sure of that. And Joel can ignore it for a while. He can act like nothing has changed. But the truth is, from this point on, everything he does with Ellie is influenced by that moment, by what Tess saw in her, and by what she forced Joel to carry forward, whether he was ready for it or not.
If you want to understand where Joel's life is heading at this point in the story, you don't need a flash forward. You just need Bill. Because Bill isn't some random side character thrown in to help move the plot along. He's a glimpse of what Joel becomes if nothing changes. Same world, same logic, same survival instincts, just taken to their natural conclusion. Completely alone. When Joel brings Ellie into Bill's town, it's supposed to be practical. Bill owes him a favor, he needs a car, simple as that. But the place itself tells you everything before Bill even shows up. It's quiet, but not peaceful. Traps everywhere, barricades, dead bodies left as warnings. Every inch of the town is built around one idea: keep everyone else out. That kind of environment doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from someone who stopped believing in people entirely. And when Bill finally appears, he fits it perfectly. Paranoid, aggressive, constantly on edge. He doesn't trust Joel, even though they've worked together before. He definitely doesn't trust Ellie. Every interaction is defensive, almost hostile, like he's expecting betrayal at any moment. At first glance, it's easy to see Bill as just another survivalist, pushed too far by the Cordyceps outbreak. But the longer you sit with it, the more uncomfortable it gets, because the way he thinks isn't actually that different from Joel. The difference is what he's lost, or more accurately, what he's chosen to cut off. Bill has taken Joel's philosophy: don't rely on anyone, don't get close, don't give the world a chance to hurt you, and pushed it as far as it can go. He's removed the risk completely by removing people from his life altogether. And what's left is nothing. There's a moment where Bill talks about caring for someone, and he doesn't say it gently. He says it like it's a mistake, like it's the one thing you should avoid at all costs, because in his experience, it only leads to loss. He's not wrong, exactly, but he's not right either.
That becomes painfully clear when Joel and Ellie find Frank, Bill's partner. Not someone Joel knew well, not someone who gets a long explanation, but someone who clearly mattered. And the way Frank died tells you everything about what Bill's life has become. Alone, desperate, choosing the end rather than continuing in a world like this. And more importantly, choosing it away from Bill. That detail matters because it suggests that even the one connection Bill allowed himself didn't survive the way he thought it would. Either it broke down or it became something neither of them could live with. And instead of learning from that, instead of adjusting, Bill doubles down on the same mindset. People are the problem. Isolation is the solution. Joel sees all of this, even if he doesn't say it out loud. You can tell in the way he reacts, not dramatically, not with some sudden moment of clarity, but in the quiet shift of how he treats Ellie afterwards. It's subtle, but it's there. A little more trust, a little less resistance, like part of him is recognizing something he doesn't want to fully admit yet. Because Bill isn't just a warning, he's proof. Proof that Joel's current path leads somewhere very specific, and it's not somewhere good. It's a life where survival is the only goal, but there's nothing left to actually live for. No connection, no purpose beyond the next day. And the most important part is this: Bill survives. He's not failing in the traditional sense. He's alive, he's resourceful, he's built a system that works. If survival was the only measure of success, Bill is doing everything right. But when you look at him, it doesn't feel like success. It feels like the cost. That's what makes this chapter so important for Joel's character, because it introduces a question he hasn't had to confront directly before. Not whether he can survive. He already knows he can, but whether survival on its own is actually enough. And Ellie is right there at the center of that question. She's the opposite of everything Bill represents. Open, curious, still holding on to pieces of humanity that Joel has long since buried. She talks, she jokes, she pushes back. She refuses to let the world reduce her to pure survival. And that makes her dangerous in a different way. Because if Joel lets himself connect with her, really connect, then he's opening the door to everything he's been trying to avoid for 20 years. Loss, pain, responsibility. But if he doesn't, if he keeps going the way he is, he ends up like Bill, alive and completely alone. That's the choice starting to form here, even if Joel doesn't fully see it yet. Not a clear, defined decision, but a direction. Two paths that both make sense in this world, but lead to very different outcomes. And for the first time, Joel is starting to drift away from the one he's been on for a long time.
Up to this point, Joel has been moving forward out of obligation. Tess told him to, the Fireflies might matter, Ellie might matter, but none of that has really sunk in yet. On the surface, he's still doing what he always does, completing the job, staying detached, keeping things transactional. But something starts to shift after Bill. Not all at once, not dramatically, just enough that you can feel it, because this is where Joel begins to do something he hasn't done properly in years. He starts to trust someone. The journey after leaving Bill's town isn't just physical movement, it's emotional movement, even if Joel would never describe it that way. Ellie keeps talking, keeps asking questions, keeps pushing into spaces Joel usually keeps locked down, about the world before the Cordyceps outbreak, about how things used to be, about who he was. And Joel doesn't shut her down as hard anymore. That's the first sign. Earlier, he would have brushed it off completely, or snapped back to create distance. Now, he still resists, but there are cracks. He answers occasionally, gives small pieces away. Not enough to fully open up, but enough to show that the wall isn't as solid as it used to be. And that matters, because trust isn't just about what Joel says, it's about what he allows. There's a key moment that really defines this shift when Joel gives Ellie a weapon. On the surface, it's practical. They're outnumbered, the world is dangerous, and having an extra pair of hands helps. But psychologically, it's huge. Joel doesn't trust easily, especially not with something like that. Weapons mean responsibility, control, risk. And Joel has spent years controlling everything around him to avoid risk. So handing Ellie a gun isn't just strategy, it's a decision.
It's Joel acknowledging that she's not just something he's transporting anymore. She's someone who can act, who can help, who can influence whether they live or die. And more importantly, it's Joel accepting that he needs her. That's the real turning point. Because for most of his life post-outbreak, Joel has operated under one core belief: rely on yourself, because relying on others gets you killed. That belief is what shaped his time as a hunter, what drove Tommy away, what allowed him to survive at the cost of everything else. But here, that belief starts to break down. Not because Joel suddenly becomes optimistic about people, but because Ellie proves herself in a way he can't ignore. She saves him, she keeps up, she adapts. She doesn't collapse under pressure the way he might have expected someone her age to. And that forces Joel to reassess. Not consciously, not in some reflective way, but through action. He starts letting her take part in decisions, starts treating her less like a liability and more like a partner. And with that comes something else: vulnerability. Joel doesn't like it. You can feel that in how guarded he still is, how quickly he shuts down certain topics, especially anything tied to his past. Sarah is still off limits. Tess is barely acknowledged. The emotional core of who he is remains buried. But Ellie is getting closer to it. And that's dangerous territory for Joel, because the more he lets her in, the more he risks losing her. And losing her wouldn't just be another loss. It would reopen everything he spent 20 years trying to suppress. That's why this chapter is so important, because it's not just about trust in the present. It's about what that trust sets up later. Every decision Joel makes from here on out, every moment where he chooses to protect Ellie, to stay with her, to open up just a little more, is building towards something much bigger, something he doesn't fully see yet, but that's already forming beneath the surface. Because once Joel lets someone in again, truly lets them in, he doesn't do it halfway. We've already seen that with Sarah. And now, slowly, it's happening again. He starts asking Ellie questions back, not just answering hers. He listens, he engages. The dynamic shifts from one-sided tolerance to something closer to mutual connection. It's subtle, but it's real. And it completely changes the trajectory of the story. Because from this point forward, Ellie isn't just the reason Joel is moving through the world. She becomes the reason he starts to feel something in it again. And that's the moment everything becomes more complicated. Because trust in a world like this isn't just risky. It's the beginning of attachment. And for Joel, attachment has always come with a cost.
Pittsburgh is where the mask slips. Up until now, you can still argue that Joel is just a hardened survivor doing what he has to do. Brutal, yes. Cold, definitely. But still operating within some kind of understandable logic. Protect yourself, protect the mission, keep moving. Pittsburgh destroys that illusion, because this is where you see very clearly what Joel used to be, and more importantly, what he's still capable of becoming. When Joel and Ellie first arrive at the city, there's a moment that seems small, but actually says everything. A man stumbles into the road begging for help. He looks injured, desperate, harmless. Ellie wants to stop. Joel doesn't even hesitate. He tells her to put her seatbelt on. That one decision reveals a lot, because Joel recognizes the situation instantly, not as a victim, but as a tactic. He knows this trick because he's used it himself, pretending to be weak to lure people in, then ambushing them when they get close. That's not survival instinct, that's learned behavior. That's Joel admitting, without saying it out loud, that he used to be one of them. And instead of slowing down, instead of taking the risk, Joel accelerates straight into the man. No hesitation, no second guessing, just impact. That moment matters because it tells you something uncomfortable. Joel doesn't just understand how these hunters think, he thinks like them. And as they move deeper into Pittsburgh, that idea only gets reinforced. The hunters aren't just killing people to survive, they're organized. They hunt outsiders, strip them of supplies, execute them when they're no longer useful. It's systematic, and Joel navigates it like someone who's been there before. He anticipates their movements, reads their setups, reacts before Ellie even understands what's happening. There's no learning curve for him here, no adjustment period. This is familiar territory.
Which raises the question, how many times did Joel do exactly this to other people? The game never gives you a number. It doesn't need to. The way Joel moves through Pittsburgh tells you enough. This isn't new to him. This is muscle memory. And that's where the moral line really starts to blur. Because Joel isn't just defending himself here. He's dominating. He's hunting the hunters, taking them out with efficiency that borders on ruthless. There's no attempt to avoid conflict, no effort to find a cleaner way through. He meets violence with greater violence. And the most telling part is how little it seems to affect him. Ellie reacts. She's shaken, especially when things get close, when people die right in front of her. For her, This is still something new, something that carries weight. For Joel, it's just another day. But there's one moment that shifts things slightly. When Joel falls, literally, he gets separated from Ellie, dropped into a flooded basement, alone. And for the first time in a while, he's vulnerable, not in control, not dominating the situation, just trying to survive. And when he's pinned down underwater by a hunter, seconds away from dying, Ellie saves him. That's the second turning point in their relationship. The first was Joel choosing to trust her. This is Ellie proving that trust was justified. She shoots the man, kills him, saves Joel's life, and Joel's reaction is complicated. He doesn't thank her properly at first. In fact, he almost snaps at her, tells her she shouldn't have done it, that she shouldn't have been there. But that reaction isn't anger at Ellie. It's discomfort. Because Ellie just crossed the line Joel knows all too well. The line from surviving to killing another human being. And he recognizes what that means, not just practically, but psychologically. He knows what it does to you. And for a moment, it's like he's trying to push her back from that edge, even though he's the one who brought her into this world. But then, something changes.
Not instantly, not dramatically, but enough to matter. Joel starts to acknowledge her differently. He gives her more responsibility, lets her cover him with a rifle, starts treating her like someone who can actually hold her own, because now she's proven it. And that creates a strange dynamic. Joel is still the experienced one, still the protector. But Ellie is no longer just someone being protected. She's part of the fight now, part of the system that keeps them alive. And that changes how Joel sees her. But Pittsburgh isn't just about Ellie growing stronger. It's about Joel confronting who he is. Because every action he takes here, every decision, every violent encounter, it all reinforces the same truth. Joel isn't just a survivor shaped by the Cordyceps outbreak. He's someone who adapted to it in the darkest possible way. He became what the world demanded. And now, as he moves through Pittsburgh, protecting Ellie, trusting her, slowly forming a bond with her, he's carrying all of that with him. Every brutal choice, every person he's killed, every moment where survival came before morality. And that's what makes what's coming later so important. Because Joel isn't choosing between good and evil. He's choosing between two versions of himself. The one who survived by becoming a monster, and the one who's starting to care again, whether he wants to or not.
Pittsburgh introduces violence at its most organized, but Henry and Sam introduce something far more dangerous for Joel: recognition. Not of the world, but of himself. For the first time since Sarah, Joel is forced to look at a relationship that mirrors his own, and that reflection is uncomfortable in ways he cannot easily dismiss. Henry is not just another survivor. He is a protector, a decision-maker, someone who has shaped his entire identity around keeping another person alive. That alone puts him on Joel's level. But the real parallel comes through Sam. The dynamic between them is unmistakable. Henry leads, Sam follows. Henry makes the hard choices. Sam trusts him to do so. It is not identical to Joel and Ellie, but it is close enough that Joel cannot ignore it, even if he tries. Their first interaction is pure instinct. Joel attacks first, without hesitation, and with an intensity that reveals how quickly he defaults to violence when threatened. There is no attempt at negotiation, no hesitation, just immediate dominance. Even when the situation stabilizes, Joel does not relax. His suspicion lingers because his worldview has taught him that trust is earned slowly and often not worth giving at all. But Henry changes that not through force, but through familiarity. As he explains his situation, his motivations, the simple fact that he is trying to get Sam out alive, Joel begins to recognize something he understands deeply. This is not a hunter manipulating the system. This is someone navigating it, just as he is. That is the first shift. Joel does not become friendly, but he becomes cooperative, and that is significant. Cooperation for Joel is not a default state. It is something he allows when necessary, and here, necessity is layered with something else: respect. He sees Henry as capable, as someone who can make decisions under pressure, and that creates a fragile but real alliance. However, the moment Henry abandons Joel during their escape fractures that alliance immediately. When Henry chooses to save himself and Sam rather than help Joel and Ellie, it feels like betrayal, but it is more complicated than that. Joel's reaction is explosive because he understands exactly why he did it. There is no confusion, no misunderstanding of motive. Henry made the same kind of calculation Joel has made countless times: prioritize the person who matters most. And that is precisely the problem. Joel is not just angry at Henry for leaving him behind. He is angry because Henry's decision reflects his own past behavior. It is a reminder of who he has been, of the choices he has justified under the banner of survival. The anger is real, but it is also displaced. It is directed outward, but it originates inward. What follows is not reconciliation in any meaningful sense, but an acceptance of shared reality. They continue together because they understand that despite everything, cooperation increases their chances of survival. And within that cooperation, something subtle begins to emerge. Joel allows himself to engage.
There are moments, brief but telling, where Joel speaks more freely than he has before. He shares small fragments of his past, mentions Tommy, even hints at a life that existed before everything collapsed under the Cordyceps outbreak. These are not deep confessions, but they are openings, and they occur specifically because Henry is there. Because Henry represents a version of Joel that still retains some connection to others. That possibility, however, is short-lived. Sam's infection changes everything, and the way it unfolds is crucial. Sam does not reveal his bite immediately, which introduces a layer of fear that Joel understands but does not excuse. In this world, infection is not just personal, it is existential. One infected individual can destroy an entire group, and Joel's response to that threat is immediate and uncompromising. When Sam turns, Joel does not hesitate. He reaches for his weapon, ready to act, because in his mind, the situation is already resolved. Sam is no longer Sam. He is a threat that must be eliminated. It is a harsh perspective, but it is consistent with everything Joel has become. Henry cannot do the same. His hesitation is not weakness in the traditional sense, but it is fatal. He cannot separate the infected from the person he loves, and that inability to act decisively results in a collapse that Joel witnesses in real time. Henry is forced to kill Sam, and in doing so, he destroys the very foundation of his identity. Without Sam, there is no purpose, no direction, nothing to anchor him to the world. His suicide follows almost immediately. It is abrupt, shocking, and completely logical within the framework of his character. Henry's entire existence was built around protecting Sam, and once that role is gone, he has nothing left to sustain him. Joel understands this instantly, even if he does not articulate it. What matters is how Joel processes this. Externally, he does not. He moves on, shuts down the conversation, refuses to engage with the emotional weight of what just happened. This is consistent with his pattern: bury the pain, keep moving, survive. But internally, the impact is unavoidable. Henry and Sam demonstrate the full cost of attachment in this world, not in theory, but in practice. They show Joel what happens when you allow yourself to care deeply and then lose that person. It is not just grief, it is collapse. And yet, despite witnessing that, Joel does not pull away from Ellie. If anything, the opposite begins to happen. That is what makes this chapter so important. It does not push Joel back into isolation, even though it gives him every reason to retreat. Instead, it reinforces the significance of his connection to Ellie while simultaneously raising the stakes of that connection to an almost unbearable level. Because now Joel knows exactly what he stands to lose. And he continues forward anyway.
By the time Joel reaches Jackson, something inside him is already shifting, even if he hasn't fully admitted it to himself yet. The journey with Ellie, everything from Tess to Pittsburgh to Henry and Sam, has been quietly reshaping him, forcing cracks into a worldview he spent 20 years reinforcing. But Jackson is different. Because Jackson isn't survival, it's life. And that distinction matters more than anything Joel has encountered so far. When Joel reunites with Tommy at the dam, the moment is surprisingly warm. There's no immediate tension, no hostility, just relief. Tommy hugs him, jokes with him, treats him like a brother rather than a burden or a threat. For a brief moment, Joel isn't the hardened smuggler or the violent survivor. He's just Joel again. And that's dangerous. Because Tommy represents something Joel hasn't allowed himself to consider for a long time. A version of life that isn't built purely on violence and survival. Tommy didn't just survive the Cordyceps outbreak. He found a way to rebuild something meaningful afterwards. A community, a relationship, a purpose that extends beyond the next day. Joel notices that immediately. You can see it in the way he looks around Jackson, the people working together, the sense of order, the fact that children are growing up here. It's not perfect, but it's stable. It's human in a way the rest of the world isn't anymore. And the key point is this: Joel could have had this. Tommy even hints at it through their conversations. Their past is brought up carefully, but it's there. The things they did to survive, the way Joel led them, the moral lines they crossed. Tommy didn't just leave Joel randomly. He left because he couldn't live that way anymore. He couldn't keep following Joel down that path of brutality, of doing whatever it takes, regardless of who it hurts. That's important, because it reframes Joel's past. Joel wasn't just surviving, he was shaping how they survived. Tommy's departure wasn't weakness, it was rejection. A rejection of Joel's worldview, of the idea that survival at any cost is the only way forward. And now, standing in Jackson, you see the result of that rejection. Tommy built something better.
And Joel knows it. That's why the next decision he makes is so revealing. He tries to give Ellie to Tommy. On the surface, it looks practical. Tommy has experience with the Fireflies, he knows the terrain, he's capable. It makes sense that he would take over the mission. But psychologically, it's much deeper than that. Joel is trying to step back, not because he doesn't care, but because he does. Everything that's happened up to this point, Tess's death, Ellie saving his life, Henry and Sam, it's all been pushing Joel towards something he's been trying to avoid since Sarah died. Attachment, responsibility, the risk of loss that comes with it. And now, standing in a place like Jackson, where life actually has meaning again, Joel feels that risk more clearly than ever. So he tries to escape it by handing Ellie off. It's not framed that way, of course. Joel doesn't say, "I'm scared of losing her." He frames it as logic, as responsibility, as doing what's best for the mission. But underneath that, the truth is obvious. He doesn't trust himself to go through with it. Because if Ellie dies, if something happens to her, it won't just be another loss. It will break him. Tommy sees through this immediately. He pushes back, not just because he doesn't want the responsibility, but because he understands what Joel is doing. Joel isn't delegating, he's retreating, trying to avoid the emotional consequences of a journey he's already too invested in. Their argument brings everything to the surface: the resentment, the past, the way they survived. Tommy calls it out directly: what they did, the things Joel justified, the way he shaped their lives during those years. There's anger there, but also truth. Joel responds the only way he knows how: with force. He shoves Tommy, threatens him, tries to assert control over the situation the same way he always has. It's a a return to that old version of himself that solves problems through dominance rather than understanding. But this time, it doesn't work. Because Tommy isn't that person anymore. He stands his ground, pushes back, refuses to be controlled the way he once was. And that forces Joel into a position he's not comfortable with. One where he can't simply impose his will and expect things to fall into place. At the same time, Ellie overhears everything.
And her reaction changes the entire dynamic. When Joel finds her later, the confrontation is raw in a way we haven't seen before. Ellie calls him out directly, not just on the decision to leave her, but on what it represents. To her, this isn't about the mission, it's about abandonment. Everyone she's cared about has either died or left, and now Joel is trying to do the same. What makes this moment powerful is that Ellie forces Joel to confront something he's been avoiding, his own motivations. She doesn't accept the logical explanation. She pushes past it, straight into the emotional truth. And Joel reacts defensively. He tries to shut it down, tries to reassert distance, even goes as far as saying she's not his daughter. That line is deliberate, and it cuts both ways. It's meant to create separation, to reestablish boundaries, to remind both of them that this is not personal. But it doesn't work, because by this point, it already is. That's the turning point, not the argument itself, but what comes after. Joel has time to think, to sit with what Ellie said, to process everything that's happened since the beginning of the journey. And for the first time, he makes a decision that goes against his usual instinct. He stays, not because it's logical, not because it's safe, but because it's what he wants. That choice matters more than anything else in this chapter, because it confirms something that's been building for a long time. Joel is no longer just surviving, he's choosing, and what he's choosing is Ellie. By the time Joel and Ellie reach the University of Eastern Colorado, something fundamental has changed in their relationship. The tension that defined the early chapters is gone, replaced by something quieter, more natural, almost resembling normality. They joke, they explore, they talk about things that have nothing to do with survival. For a brief stretch, it feels like they are not just moving through a ruined world shaped by the Cordyceps infection, but actually living in it. That illusion matters because it sets up what comes next. The university is supposed to be the end of the journey, or at least the point where everything begins to make sense. The Fireflies are here, or at least they were meant to be. Joel has committed to this path now, not out of obligation, but because he has chosen to see it through. Ellie trusts him. He trusts her. The mission has become something more than a transaction. And then they arrive, and it's empty. That emptiness is more than just a plot development. It's symbolic. Everything Joel has been moving toward, everything Tess believed in, everything Ellie represents, it all feels uncertain again. The Fireflies aren't here. The answers aren't here. The hope that has been driving this journey suddenly feels fragile, almost illusory. Joel reacts to this in a very specific way. He doesn't panic. He doesn't collapse. He adapts. That's what he's always done. They search the area methodically, looking for clues, trying to piece together what happened. Joel stays focused on the practical. Where did they go? What direction? What evidence is left behind? But there's a subtle shift in his tone when he talks to Ellie. He's not just managing the situation anymore. He's reassuring her. That's new. Earlier in the story, Joel would have kept things blunt, detached, purely factual. Now there's an effort to maintain stability for Ellie, to keep her grounded even when things aren't going as planned. That's not just survival instinct, that's care. And then they find the recorder.
It confirms that the Fireflies have moved on, heading to Salt Lake City. The journey isn't over. In fact, it's about to get longer,
more dangerous, more uncertain. For Ellie, that's frustrating but manageable. For Joel, it introduces something more complicated. Because now, the longer this goes on, the deeper the attachment becomes, and Joel knows that. But before he can fully process that, everything falls apart again. As they try to leave the university, they're ambushed. This moment is important because it's not just another fight. Joel has handled countless violent encounters up to this point, often with control, efficiency, and a kind of calculated brutality that keeps him ahead of the situation. But here, something goes wrong. He gets caught. Not outplayed, not overwhelmed, just caught in a moment where things don't go according to plan. He's forced into close combat, thrown off balance, and in the chaos, he falls. And when he lands, it's not just a fall, it's a puncture. A piece of rebar drives through his body, and suddenly Joel, the man who has dominated almost every situation he's been in, is reduced to something else entirely. Vulnerable, weak, bleeding. This is the first time in the story where Joel is truly, physically out of control. And that matters more than the injury itself, because Joel's entire identity is built around control. Control of situations, control of outcomes, control of himself. It's how he survived the outbreak, how he navigated the world, how he kept himself from falling apart after Sarah. And now, that control is gone. What makes this moment even more powerful is how Ellie responds. She doesn't freeze. She doesn't panic in a way that stops her from acting. She steps up. She defends Joel, shoots attackers, creates space, makes decisions under pressure. The roles shift completely. Joel, who has been the protector for the entire journey, is now the one being protected. And Ellie doesn't hesitate. That reversal is critical because it forces Joel into a position he's avoided for years. Dependence. Not emotional dependence, not yet, but physical reliance on someone else to survive. And that someone is Ellie. As they escape the university, Joel is barely conscious, barely able to move. Every step is effort, every action strained. The man who once moved through Pittsburgh like a predator is now struggling just to stay upright. And Ellie carries him. Not literally the entire time, but in every way that matters. She supports him, guides him, keeps him moving when he would otherwise collapse. And Joel allows it. That's the key point. He allows it. Because he has no choice, but also because at some level he trusts her enough to do so. As they finally make it out, riding away from the university, Joel loses consciousness. The control is completely gone now. He's not fighting anymore, not thinking strategically, not making decisions. He's just fading. And for the first time since the story began, Joel is no longer driving the narrative forward. Ellie is. This chapter marks a complete shift in the dynamic, not just in terms of who is physically in control, but in terms of what Joel represents. Up until now, he has been the constant, the one who survives, who endures, who pushes forward no matter what. But here, that certainty is broken, and with it, something else becomes clear. Joel is not invincible. He is human. And if he can fall this far, this quickly, then everything he's been building with Ellie, everything he started to feel, whether he admits it or not, can be taken away just as suddenly. That's the real tension introduced here.
Winter doesn't just slow the story down. It strips it back to its core. When Joel collapses after the university, the entire dynamic of the journey flips. And for the first time since the outbreak began shaping his life, Joel is no longer the one holding everything together. He's unconscious, barely alive, drifting in and out while infection and blood loss threaten to finish what the rebar started. And Ellie is left alone. Not just physically alone, but alone in responsibility. Up until this point, Ellie has been learning, adapting, proving herself in bursts. Pittsburgh, the rifle, saving Joel. But she has always had Joel as a safety net, someone to fall back on, someone to take control when things spiral. That safety net is gone now. What makes this chapter so powerful is that Ellie doesn't hesitate to step into that gap. There's no long moment of doubt, no dramatic pause where she questions whether she can do it. She just does. She hunts, she scavenges, she protects Joel, and in doing so, she starts to mirror him in ways that are both impressive and deeply uncomfortable. Because Ellie isn't just surviving, she's adopting Joel's methods. You see it in how she approaches danger, the way she sets up situations, how she reacts to threats, how quickly she's willing to escalate if needed. These aren't instincts she developed in isolation. They've been shaped by watching Joel, by learning from him, by absorbing the logic that has kept him alive for 2 decades. And now she's applying it. That's the first major shift. The second comes with David. When Ellie encounters David and James, the situation initially feels different from everything that's come before. There's a moment of calm, of negotiation, of something that almost resembles cooperation. David speaks calmly, offers a trade, presents himself as reasonable. For a brief moment, it feels like the world might allow for something other than violence. But Ellie doesn't fully trust it.
And that instinct, that underlying suspicion, is something she's learned directly from Joel. At the same time, she's still different from him. Ellie is willing to engage, to talk, to consider alternatives. Joel, at this stage in his life, would likely have avoided or dominated the situation immediately. Ellie tries to balance survival with something closer to humanity. That balance doesn't last. As the situation unfolds, the truth about David's group becomes clear. They are not just survivors. They are hunters in a different form, organized, predatory, and in this case, something worse: cannibals. This revelation matters because it pushes Ellie into a space where hesitation is no longer an option. The world she's navigating is not just dangerous, it's actively hostile in ways that strip away any illusion of safety or morality. And Ellie responds, not with fear that paralyzes her, but with violence. Calculated, deliberate, increasingly ruthless violence. She fights back, escapes, adapts, survives. And in doing so, she crosses a line that Joel crossed years ago, the point where killing is no longer a last resort, but a necessary tool. That's the uncomfortable truth of this chapter. Ellie is becoming Joel, not in personality, not entirely, but in function, in the way she navigates the world, in the decisions she makes under pressure, in the acceptance that survival often requires doing things that cannot be undone. And when David finally corners her, when everything collapses in that final confrontation, Ellie doesn't just defend herself, she unleashes everything. The violence is not clean, it's not controlled, it's desperate, overwhelming, emotional. She doesn't stop when the threat is neutralized, she keeps going, driven by fear, anger, survival instinct, all the things that have been building since the beginning of the journey. This is not Joel's kind of violence. This is something raw, something that shows the cost of everything she's been through. And then Joel arrives. That moment when he pulls her away, when he calls her baby girl, is one of the most important in the entire story, because it completes the shift that has been building for chapters. Joel sees what Ellie has become in that moment. He sees the fear, the trauma, the violence she's just gone through, and instead of pushing it away, instead of shutting down like he has so many times before, he connects. That phrase, baby girl, isn't accidental. It's a direct link between his past and his present, between the daughter he lost and the girl he's been trying not to care about. And in that moment, the barrier collapses. Joel is no longer just protecting Ellie. He's emotionally invested in her in a way he hasn't allowed himself to be since the beginning of the outbreak. But here's the key detail that often gets overlooked. Ellie protected Joel first. She kept him alive. She fought for him. She became what she needed to be in order to survive and to make sure he did too. That changes everything. Because from this point forward, Joel's actions are no longer just about obligation or even growing attachment. They are about something deeper. Reciprocity. Ellie saved him. Now, whether consciously or not, Joel is going to make sure he never loses her, no matter what it costs.
By the time Joel and Ellie reach Salt Lake City, the tone has shifted in a way that feels almost unsettling. After everything, Pittsburgh, Henry and Sam, Winter, David, you would expect tension, urgency, maybe even fear to dominate the final stretch. Instead, there's quiet. Not peace, exactly, but something close to it. A kind of fragile calm that sits over their interactions, as if both of them are aware, on some level, that they are approaching the end of something. Not just the journey, but the dynamic that has defined it. Ellie, in particular, feels different. She's quieter, more withdrawn. The trauma of Winter hasn't disappeared, it's settled. You can see it in how she responds to Joel, how her usual curiosity and humor are still there, but muted. She's not the same girl who joked her way through earlier chapters. She's seen too much now, done too much, and it's left its mark. Joel notices, and for perhaps the first time in the entire story, he tries to fix something emotionally rather than practically. He talks more, fills the silence, brings up random memories, even suggests that they don't have to go through with this. That line, when he offers to turn back and return to Jackson, is incredibly important because it reveals something fundamental. Joel is no longer committed to the mission, not in the way he was before. Earlier in the story, the idea of delivering Ellie to the Fireflies was tied to purpose, to Tess's final request, to the possibility of something bigger than himself. But now, after everything they've been through together, that objective has become secondary. What matters to Joel is Ellie, and he's starting to realize what completing the mission might actually mean. Ellie, however, pushes forward. She insists that they see it through, that everything they've endured, Tess, Sam, Henry, Winter, can't be for nothing. There's a quiet determination in her, one that isn't loud or dramatic, but deeply rooted. She needs this to mean something. And Joel lets it continue, not because he fully agrees, but because he doesn't want to take that from her.
Joel is beginning to pull away from the idea of the cure, while Ellie is holding on to it more tightly than ever. Then they reach the hospital, and everything happens quickly. They're attacked by infected, forced into chaos, and in the middle of it, Ellie nearly drowns. Joel's reaction is immediate, instinctive. He doesn't hesitate, doesn't calculate. He dives in, pulls her out, performs CPR. It's raw, desperate, completely unguarded. This isn't survival. This is fear. The fear of losing her. And just as he brings her back, just as it looks like everything might stabilize, he's knocked unconscious. When Joel wakes up, the world has changed again. Ellie is gone. Not lost, not missing, taken. And this moment is crucial because it strips Joel of something he has relied on for the entire journey: proximity. As long as Ellie was with him, he could protect her, influence outcomes, maintain some level of control. Now, that's gone, and what replaces it is information. Marlene explains everything. Ellie is immune. The infection in her brain can be used to create a vaccine, but extracting it will kill her. There's no ambiguity, no alternative plan, no moral gray area presented in the moment. It's a simple equation. Ellie dies, humanity might live. For most people, this would be an impossible choice. For Joel, it becomes something else entirely. Because this isn't a hypothetical. This isn't a distant moral dilemma. This is immediate, personal, and tied directly to everything he's experienced since the outbreak began. Sarah died in his arms, taken from him by a decision that wasn't his to make. Tess died, leaving him with responsibility he didn't ask for. Henry lost Sam and couldn't survive it. Ellie saved him, protected him, became the one thing in this world that feels real again. And now, he's being told to let her die. Not just accept it, allow it. That's the key difference. Joel isn't being forced into a situation where he has no control. He's being given a choice, whether Marlene frames it that way or not. He can walk away, accept the logic, accept the greater good, accept that Ellie's life is the price that has to be paid. Or he can refuse. And everything in Joel's character, everything built over the course of the story, points in one direction. Because Joel doesn't think in terms of humanity anymore. He thinks in terms of individuals, of people who matter. And Ellie is no longer just someone who matters. She is the person who matters most. That's what makes this moment so powerful. Because it's not just about what Joel decides, it's about why he decides it. This isn't a sudden shift into selfishness or emotional weakness. It's the logical endpoint of everything he's been through. Every loss, every connection, every moment where survival came at a cost, it all leads here. Joel is being asked to sacrifice Ellie for a world that, in his experience, has not earned that sacrifice. A world filled with hunters, cannibals, broken systems, and endless violence. And more importantly, he's being asked to sacrifice her after finally allowing himself to care again. That's not something Joel is built to do. Not anymore. So when he stands up, when he processes what Marlene has told him, when he realizes what's about to happen, he doesn't hesitate for long. Because this is the moment where Joel stops reacting to the world and starts acting against it.
Everything that Joel has been building toward, whether he realizes it or not, collapses into a single decision inside that hospital. And what makes this moment so powerful is that it doesn't feel like a dramatic turning point while it's happening. There's no long speech, no drawn-out hesitation, no visible internal debate where Joel weighs the value of humanity against the life of one girl. The choice, when it finally comes, feels almost inevitable. Because by the time he reaches this point, Joel has already made it. He just hasn't acted on it yet. When Marlene explains the situation, she frames it in the only way that makes sense from her perspective. Ellie's immunity is real. The Fireflies have the means, at least in theory, to create a vaccine. But the procedure will kill her. There is no workaround, no second option, no time to ask for Ellie's consent. That last part is crucial. Ellie doesn't get a choice, and that alone should make the situation morally uncomfortable, even before Joel enters the equation. Because what Marlene is asking for isn't just sacrifice, it's enforced sacrifice. She believes it's justified, believes that saving humanity outweighs the life of one person, even someone she cares about. Joel hears all of this, he understands it, and then he rejects it completely. Not because he doesn't grasp the stakes, but because the stakes don't matter to him in the way they're supposed to. That's the uncomfortable truth at the center of this chapter. Joel is not weighing Ellie against humanity. He's choosing Ellie, full stop. And the moment he makes that decision, everything else becomes secondary. What follows is not just violence, it's intent. Joel doesn't fight his way through the hospital like he did in Pittsburgh, reacting to threats as they appear. This is different. This is controlled, deliberate, focused. He knows exactly what he's doing, exactly where he's going, and exactly who stands in his way. The Fireflies aren't hunters. They aren't cannibals. They aren't random threats in a broken world. They are people trying to fix it. And Joel kills them anyway. That distinction matters because it strips away any easy justification. You can't frame this as self-defense in the traditional sense.
Because his worldview isn't built around abstract concepts like humanity. It's built around individuals. And Ellie is the individual. As Joel moves through the hospital, there's a coldness to his actions that feels different from earlier violence in the story. In Pittsburgh, there was urgency, chaos, reaction. Here, there is clarity. A straight line from where he starts to where Ellie is. Nothing else exists. Not the people he's killing, not the consequences, not even the possibility that what he's doing might doom countless others. All of that fades. Because for Joel, this isn't about saving Ellie in the moment. It's about refusing to lose her. And that distinction goes all the way back to Sarah. When Sarah died, Joel had no control. The decision was made for him, taken out of his hands by a system that prioritized the greater good over individual life. A soldier followed orders. Joel was left holding the consequences. That moment broke something in him. And now, standing in that hospital, he is being placed in a situation that echoes it almost perfectly. Once again, someone else is making the decision. Once again, he is being told that one life must be sacrificed for the many. But this time, Joel has control, and he refuses to give it up. When he reaches the operating room, the moment is almost quiet compared to everything that led up to it. The surgeons don't attack him immediately. There's hesitation, confusion, even an attempt to reason with him. Joel doesn't engage, because from his perspective, the conversation is already over. They are going to kill Ellie, so they have to die. It's that simple. He takes her, unconscious, unaware of everything that's happened, and carries her out of the hospital the same way he carried Sarah years ago. That parallel is not subtle. It's deliberate. But this time, the outcome is different. This time, Joel gets to choose, and he chooses to save her. Not for humanity, not for some greater purpose, not even purely for Ellie's sake. He chooses her because he cannot go through that loss again. That's the core of his decision. It's emotional, it's personal, it's rooted in trauma as much as it is in love. And as he escapes the hospital, as the immediate danger fades, there's one final step that completes the transformation. Marlene. She confronts him outside, wounded but alive, and for a moment, it feels like there might be space for resolution. She argues her position, appeals to logic, even acknowledges Joel's connection to Ellie. She knows what he's done, and she knows why. And Joel listens, but he doesn't change his mind, because Marlene represents the one thing Joel cannot allow, a future where Ellie is taken from him again. So he kills her, not out of anger, not out of impulse, but because leaving her alive introduces risk. And Joel doesn't take risks when it comes to the people he cares about. That's the final line crossed in this chapter. Not the hospital, not the surgeons, Marlene. Because in killing her, Joel removes the last thread connecting Ellie to the world that wanted to sacrifice her. He ensures that no one comes after them. He secures the decision he's made, and in doing so, he closes the door completely on the idea of the cure. That's what makes this moment so complex. Joel doesn't just save Ellie. He takes something away from the world, and he does it knowingly. Not blindly, not accidentally, knowingly. Which raises the question that sits at the heart of everything. Was he right?
At this point in the story, there is no clear answer. Only the consequences of a choice that was always going to define him.
Once Joel leaves the hospital, the most obvious part of his decision is already behind him. He has fought his way through the Fireflies, taken Ellie back, and ensured that no one is left to challenge what he's done. On the surface, the danger is over, but the real conflict isn't behind him. It's sitting right next to him in the car. Because Ellie doesn't know. And more importantly, Ellie would not accept what he's done if she did. This is where Joel's decision becomes more complicated than simple survival or even protection. Saving Ellie in the hospital was one thing. Living with her afterwards, maintaining that relationship, keeping her close while knowing what he took from her, that requires something else entirely. It requires a lie. When Ellie wakes up, she immediately senses that something is wrong, not in a dramatic, confrontational way, but in the subtle, intuitive way that has defined her character throughout the story. She asks questions, calmly at first, trying to piece together what happened while she was unconscious. Joel answers quickly, too quickly. He tells her that the Fireflies had already found other immune people, that her immunity wasn't unique, that they had stopped looking for a cure. He presents it as fact, something definitive and closed, leaving no room for further questioning. And the way he says it matters. Joel doesn't hesitate. He doesn't stumble. He delivers the lie with the same confidence he uses when explaining something practical, something grounded in reality. That confidence is deliberate, because it needs to be. If there's any uncertainty in his voice, Ellie will notice it. But here's the key detail. Joel isn't just lying to Ellie. He's constructing a version of reality that he can live with. Because the truth is not something he can give her without risking everything. If Joel tells Ellie what really happened, that she was going to die for a cure, that he stopped it, that he killed the people responsible, then he loses control of the situation again. Ellie would have a choice. She could reject what he did, resent him for it, even leave. And that is the one outcome Joel cannot accept. So the lie becomes necessary, not because it protects Ellie from pain, although Joel likely tells himself that, but because it protects Joel from losing her. That distinction is important. Joel frames the lie as something he's doing for Ellie, and on some level, there is truth to that. Ellie has already experienced more trauma than most people could survive. Adding the weight of knowing she could have been the cure, that her life might have meant something larger, would be devastating.
Because if Ellie knows the truth and decides that Joel was wrong, if she decides that her life should have been sacrificed, that the world was worth saving, then Joel's entire decision collapses. It stops being an act of protection and becomes something else entirely, something selfish. And Joel cannot face that possibility, so he lies. What makes this lie particularly powerful is that Ellie doesn't fully accept it. She listens. She processes what Joel is saying, but there's doubt in her response, a quiet uncertainty that never fully disappears. Ellie isn't naive. She has spent the entire journey learning how the world works, how people behave when they're hiding something, when they're not telling the full truth. And Joel's explanation doesn't quite fit. Not completely. That tension lingers as they travel back toward Jackson. It doesn't explode into confrontation, but it sits beneath the surface, shaping every interaction, every glance, every silence. Joel feels it. Even if he doesn't acknowledge it directly, he knows that Ellie isn't fully convinced, and that creates a kind of pressure that he hasn't experienced before. Violence, survival, loss, those are things Joel knows how to handle. This is different. This is emotional uncertainty. And instead of resolving it, Joel doubles down. He continues the lie, reinforces it through repetition, through consistency, through the absence of contradiction. Because once he's committed to it, there's no halfway point. Either he tells the truth and risks losing Ellie, or he maintains the lie and keeps her with him. There is no middle ground. That's what makes this chapter so important, because it reveals something fundamental about Joel's character that goes beyond survival, or even love. It reveals control. Joel cannot control the world. He couldn't stop Sarah's death, couldn't prevent Tess from being infected, couldn't save Henry or Sam. The world has taken things from him repeatedly, often without warning, often without giving him any say in the outcome. But here, with Ellie, he can control the narrative. He can decide what she knows, what she believes, how she understands the events that have just taken place. And he uses that control, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of losing her, fear of facing the consequences of his own actions, fear of being alone again. And as they approach Jackson, that fear doesn't go away. It settles, becomes part of the foundation of their relationship moving forward.
By the time Joel and Ellie reach Jackson, the world feels different. Not because it has changed, but because for the first time in a long while, they are stepping into something that resembles stability. Jackson isn't perfect. It isn't safe in the absolute sense, and it certainly isn't untouched by the brutality of the Cordyceps-infected world. But it represents something rare, a functioning community, a place where survival is not the only goal. And that shift matters more for Joel than it first appears, because up until this point, everything about his character has been shaped by instability, constant danger, loss, and the need to react quickly, often violently, to whatever threat appears next. His identity has been forged in chaos. His decisions, including the one at the hospital, were made under pressure, in motion, with no time to sit and reflect on the consequences. Jackson removes that pressure, and in doing so, it exposes everything Joel has been avoiding. For the first time since the outbreak, and arguably for the first time since Sarah's death, Joel is placed in an environment where he is not just surviving, but living. He has a home, a routine, a community that values contribution rather than brutality, and most importantly, he has Ellie, in a context that allows their relationship to grow beyond pure necessity. But that's exactly where the problem begins, because the decision Joel made at the hospital does not fade in a peaceful environment. It becomes louder. In the chaos of the outside world, his actions could be justified, or at least buried under the constant need to keep moving forward. In Jackson, there is time. Time to think, to remember, to question. And that time introduces a new kind of tension, one that Joel cannot solve with violence or instinct. The lie he told Ellie does not disappear. It sits between them. At first, their relationship continues to develop in a way that feels almost natural. Joel teaches Ellie how to play guitar, shares small moments with her that echo the life he once had with Sarah, and gradually allows himself to become something more than just a survivor. There is warmth in these interactions, a genuine sense that Joel is rediscovering parts of himself that he thought were gone for good. But that warmth is built on something fragile. Because Ellie is not the same person she was at the start of their journey. She has grown, matured, and developed her own understanding of the world. She has seen enough to recognize when something doesn't add up, and while she may not confront Joel immediately, the doubt never fully leaves her. That doubt slowly changes the dynamic between them. It becomes less about what Joel says, and more about what he avoids saying. Less about the moments they share, and more about the silence that follows them. Ellie begins to pull away, not in a dramatic or obvious way, but in small, subtle shifts, hesitation in conversation, a lack of openness,
a growing sense that something important has been withheld from her. And Joel notices it.
Even if he doesn't acknowledge it out loud, he can feel the distance forming. The connection he fought so hard to build, the relationship that justified everything he did at the hospital, is no longer as secure as it once seemed. This is where the real consequence of his decision begins to take shape. Because Joel didn't just save Ellie, he reshaped her future without her consent. He took away the possibility of her choosing her own role in the world, of deciding for herself whether her life should be used to create a cure. And while that choice may have been impossible to make in the moment, removing it entirely creates a different kind of damage. Ellie needed meaning. Throughout the journey, her immunity wasn't just a biological anomaly, it was purpose. It gave weight to everything she endured, everything she lost, everything she survived. It allowed her to believe that the suffering had a direction, that it was leading somewhere important. Joel takes that away and replaces it with something quieter, smaller, more personal. A life in Jackson. For Joel, that's enough. More than enough, in fact. It represents safety, connection, the chance to rebuild something that resembles a family. But for Ellie, it's not so simple. The world she grew up in does not allow for easy acceptance of peace, especially when that peace comes at the cost of unanswered questions. So the illusion begins to crack, not all at once, but gradually, over time. Joel tries to maintain normalcy, to reinforce the life they're building, to act as though the past is settled and the future is clear. But the more he does that, the more it highlights the gap between what he believes is right and what Ellie might eventually realize for herself. And this is where Joel's character reaches a new level of complexity, because for all his strength, all his decisiveness, all his willingness to act when others hesitate, he is now faced with something he cannot control: Ellie's perception of him. He cannot fight it. He cannot reason it away. He cannot protect her from it without revealing the truth he's been hiding. The only thing he can do is wait and hope that the life he has given her will be enough to outweigh the life he took from her. That hope is fragile, because deep down, Joel understands something that he would never say out loud. If Ellie knew the truth, she might not choose him.
After everything Joel has done, every life he has taken, every decision he has forced, every truth he has buried, the question that remains is unavoidable. Was he right? It's a question that feels simple on the surface, but the more you examine it, the more it resists a clean answer. Because Joel's final choice isn't just a moral dilemma. It's the culmination of everything he has become, shaped by loss, survival, and the slow rebuilding of a connection he never expected to feel again. To answer it properly, you have to go back to the beginning. Not just to the hospital, but to Sarah. Because Joel's entire worldview fractures in that moment. He loses his daughter not because of randomness, but because someone else decides that her life is expendable in the name of a greater good. A soldier follows orders, prioritizes containment over compassion, and Joel is left holding the consequences of that decision for the rest of his life. That experience doesn't just traumatize him, it rewires him. It teaches him, brutally and permanently, that systems, ideologies, and the greater good will always justify sacrifice, and that those sacrifices are rarely made by the people making the decisions. From that point on, Joel stops believing in abstract values and starts believing in something much smaller but far more tangible: the people in front of him. That philosophy carries him through the worst parts of his life. It's what allows him to survive as a hunter,
to do things that are undeniably brutal, because in his mind, survival is no longer about morality. It's about proximity. Protect what is yours. Do what is necessary. Don't pretend the world is something it isn't. When Ellie enters his life, that philosophy doesn't change. It narrows. At first, she is just another responsibility, another job, another obligation he didn't ask for. But as they travel together, as he watches her fight, adapt, survive, and still hold on to something resembling hope, she becomes something else entirely. Not just someone he protects, someone he needs. And that distinction is everything. Because by the time they reach the hospital, Joel is no longer acting as a detached survivor making calculated decisions. He is acting as someone who has rebuilt a bond he thought was gone forever, and who understands exactly what it feels like to lose it. So when the Fireflies present their solution, when they frame Ellie's death as necessary, as justified, as the only way forward, Joel doesn't see a moral dilemma. He sees the same situation that killed Sarah. Different people, different justification, same outcome. Someone else deciding that the person he loves has to die.
From that perspective, Joel's decision is not complicated at all. He refuses, and that refusal is what defines him. Now, to be fair, the argument against Joel is strong. The Fireflies believe they can create a cure. Even if the chances are uncertain, the possibility exists, and Joel destroys it completely. He doesn't delay it, doesn't question it, doesn't attempt to find an alternative, he removes it entirely. In doing so, he potentially condemns countless people to continued suffering in a world dominated by infection, violence, and decay. From a purely utilitarian perspective, that is indefensible. One life weighed against many should not win. And if you treat Ellie as a means to an end, if you reduce her to her immunity, then Joel's actions look selfish, even catastrophic. But that perspective relies on something that the world of The Last of Us does not support: certainty. There is no guarantee that the Fireflies would have succeeded. Their methods are desperate, their resources limited, and their understanding of the Cordyceps infection incomplete. The idea of a cure is not a certainty, it's a hope, one built on fragile foundations. And more importantly, it ignores Ellie herself. Because Ellie is not just a cure, she is a person. She has agency, identity, relationships, and a life that exists beyond her immunity. The Fireflies never give her the chance to choose, never allow her to understand the decision being made for her. They strip that choice away, just as the soldier did with Sarah, just as the world has done countless times before. Joel sees that, and he refuses to accept it. So the question shifts. It's no longer just about whether Joel saved humanity or doomed it. It's about whether he had the right to decide. And here is where the conclusion becomes clearer. Joel did not choose between Ellie and the world. He chose against a system that demanded her death without her consent. He chose to preserve a life that had been reduced to a function. He rejected a version of morality that justifies sacrifice without accountability. Was that selfish? Yes. There is no honest way to deny that Joel's love for Ellie, his fear of losing her, and his inability to endure that pain again all played a role in his decision. He did not act as a neutral observer weighing outcomes. He acted as someone deeply emotionally invested in one person. But that does not automatically make him wrong, because the alternative is not as clean as it seems. The Fireflies' plan required certainty they did not have, demanded a sacrifice they did not fully understand, and removed the one thing that should have mattered most: choice. Joel restores that, even if imperfectly. Even if he replaces one form of control with another through his lie. Even if the consequences of that decision ripple outward in ways he cannot predict.
At its core, Joel's decision is a rejection of a broken world's logic. A world that has already proven it will destroy itself in the name of survival, that will sacrifice individuals for abstract goals, that will justify violence as long as it points towards something hopeful. Joel doesn't believe in that hope. Not anymore. What he believes in is Ellie. Her life, her future, her existence as something more than a tool. And when you look at it through that lens, his decision becomes something else. Not the destruction of humanity's future, but the preservation of something that humanity had already lost: value for the individual. So, was Joel right? If you measure his actions by numbers, by outcomes, by the potential scale of what was lost, then no. But if you measure them by principle, by the idea that no one should be forced to die for a cause they never agreed to, that a single life cannot be reduced to a means to an end, that love and connection matter even in a broken world, then the answer changes. Because Joel didn't just save Ellie. He chose a version of humanity that still recognizes what a life is worth. And in a world that had almost forgotten that completely, that might be the most human choice anyone could have made.